they're performing surgery, they should be treated just like any other surgical facility. And that includes mandated inspections. Well, it's been an all too common thing of failing health inspections. And this past year, they had 9 of their facilities fail a health inspection. So 9 of the 18, half of Pennsylvania's abortion facilities failed a health inspection.
Hello and welcome to the Ann Phelim Scoop.
I'm Ann McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer, and welcome to the Scoop from a very cold, a very freezing Los Angeles. How do you people live out there? Is this what you had? Mike, what kind of people are you living in the cold out there? It must be terrible.
we need global warming very badly here. Yeah.
In LA
very
next
bad.
Week.
Talking of which, we'll get on to that. Phelim, what's happening in this week's podcast?
The LA Times has written. We're going to examine an LA Times. It's a glowing story.
Front page news story.
A glowing story about Hollywood's latest golden couple. No, you won't have seen them at the Golden Globes. It's not A-list celebrities. It's just Hunter Biden and his sleazy lawyer, Kevin Morris. Hollywood's newest golden couple that deserved, I think, 5,000 words in the LA Times. We bring you the true story, which we can tell you in a lot less words.
Yes, and not so shocking news out of Pennsylvania. Turns out that Pennsylvania has learned absolutely nothing since the Gosnell case. We'll be interviewing someone from the Pennsylvania Family Institute about the horrific state of abortion facilities in Pennsylvania, and you will not want to miss that extraordinary story. And Colorado's latest environmental scheme will have you howling. Do you see that play on words there?
They don't know what the play on words is.
Oh no, that's true. But there is a play on words there. Actually, that's very good.
Howling,
that's
howling,
right. Very good.
Yes.
Howling.
Okay, have a think now. What is the story about when we say it will have you howling? Okay.
Go on, Phelim.
Okay, and we speak to the reporter who played a large part in bringing down Harvard President Claudine Gay. We asked, what does it mean for the future of destructive DEI policies and for the future of journalism, when a lot of journalists were more concerned about the source of the stories, or rather, who was reporting on the stories, rather than the content of the stories. To misquote Martin Luther King, which is more important, the content of your story or the color of your newspaper.
Oh, very good. And we show how your tax dollars are going to support the families of martyrs, in other words, terrorists who spent the last minutes of their lives on earth killing Jews.
Yes.
Very, very disturbing story from the Wall Street Journal.
And going forward, we'll be bringing you a different kind of podcast for the next few weeks. It's kind of a switcheroo from the...
We're on the road, Phelim.
We're on the road again. Switcheroo from the normal Ann Phelim Scoop, because what begins next week is the defamation / free speech trial of the century, and the trial of our friend Mark Steyn is starting next week. The broadcaster, journalist,
and we will be in the court case every day.
We're gonna very excited to spend a few weeks in the company of Mark Steyn, the smartest Canadian on earth since Ted Cruz was born.
Boom, boom. Oh, Phelim, that's very
political.
That's very political. Yes, and we have a delicious chicken sheet pan recipe. You have to be very careful how you say that. Chicken sheet pan recipe. Very simple for an elevated weekend meal. Do you like that elevated weekend meal? I love that elevated idea. No, it's just kind of elevated. It's kind of one of those, it's kind of like that kind of cookery speak. Oh, it's like, an elevated midweek dinner, And it was very elevated.
Elevate the elements.
Right, Phelim. Tell us about the Los Angeles Times, which yesterday ran an extraordinary front page news story about a couple that we unfortunately know far too much about.
Yes. So before I came over here, I printed out the story, and you know where you print out a story to give to a friend or something, and it's this, right? It's 2 pages long. This is not it's I think it's between 3,900 words.
Wow.
Who would lend millions to Hunter Biden? Meet the Hollywood lawyer who has. Well, I've met the Hollywood lawyer who did. His name is Kevin Morris. It starts off, really, it's a love story. Hunter Biden, 35 pages of a love story. And this is how it starts. On a fall day in 2019, one of Hollywood's top lawyers drove to the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains to see Hunter Biden. Biden's life had reached a critical point. His father was in a crowded primary field for the Democratic presidential nomination. The younger Biden had decamped to a poolside mid-century rental that looked out over the San Fernando Valley. Newly sober, newly married, and climbing out of the wreckage of years of crack and alcohol addiction with a daily ritual of painting. Actually, they're not using good commas there. Newly sober, newly married, and climbing out of the wreckage of years of crack and alcohol addiction with a daily ritual of painting. Yeah. After briefly meeting at a recent fundraiser, Kevin Morris arrived to view Biden's art. Well, that would have taken 2 minutes. They retreated to Biden's kitchen table, where Morris posed a question. Kevin, how are you doing? The reply stretched over several hours. God, if you weren't a drug addict before listening to Hunter Biden tell him how he's doing, that would drive you to drugs. Morris retrieved a legal pad from his car and took notes as Biden opened up. His life, already marred by the deaths decades ago of his mother and baby sister, had by then seemed an unstoppable calamity, starting with the more recent death of his brother Beau, the depth of his crack addiction, the mounting alimony, the unpaid and unfiled taxes, the Arkansas woman who claimed he fathered her child, and the escalating political attacks and more. I mean,
claimed.
Yeah. If you want anything that's wrong, so this is 35 pages by Matt Hamilton, and it's the biggest soft soap on Kevin Morris I've ever read, and by extension Hunter Biden. Look, Hunter Biden has admitted he fathered this child, that this woman was telling the truth all along. To frame it as if an Arkansas...
Well, it wasn't even, forget about that. A paternity test proved it. So he was forced, actually, through a legal process, to admit that this child...
Yeah.
But it was only by being forced legally to acknowledge it, and that there was a paternity test that
By the way,
happened.
Why, what difference does it make that she's from Arkansas? Arkansas was put in there for a reason, right? Oh, the white trash one who said, not like us cool kids in the Hollywood, right? Together, they made a list of things in Biden's life that had to be tackled. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship that would confound and fascinate both Hollywood and Washington. Yeah,
Not really.
Not really. But so, look, I obviously I can't go through all 35 pages, but there's just a few things.
Please don't.
It's a love story, yeah. We all love stories. Morris has assumed several roles in Biden's life, foremost as his lawyer, but also as his friend, confidant, and bankroller. So he's given him about $4.9 million. He has lent millions of dollars to Biden to cover his tax debts, housing, and legal fees. Now, if you were a journalist, at that very point, you might step into the article and say, but Biden didn't pay his tax debts from the millions of dollars, because it's there in the indictment from the IRS. Let's put that up there. He received $1.9 million in 2020 and 2021 and used not one penny of it to pay his tax debts. Not one penny to the IRS. He paid $11,000 a month for a Venice, a canal side house in Venice. $11,000 a month. A month. Just for my first house cost $39,000 to buy.
We're going back into ancient history now, Phelim.
Well, no. There was Friends were on TV at the time, I think. Were they? Yeah, maybe. No, but I'm just saying $11,000. I mean, so what's the average salary in America? Is it $30,000? So it's he in 3 months he was paying on his house in Venice that was lent to him by his boyfriend lawyer Kevin Morris. And he didn't think to pay, and then he was paying off his Porsche as well. He received $1.9 million, as it says in the indictment, did not use one penny of it to pay off his tax bills. That's why he's been indicted. Then he goes on. Friends offer few clues about why they're such great friends. Morris struggled through his own addiction, and since turning away from alcohol more than 20 years ago, he has helped others. Despite their divergent paths, the men share much in common. Can I just say something? And I told the journalist, I spoke to this journalist, Matt Hamilton. I spoke to him several times, many times, at length. Kevin Morris told me, and it's on tape because he was interviewing me at the time, that he is a recovering drug addict, not an alcohol addict. He is a recovering drug addict. And we discussed addiction, because I'm very interested in addiction, being Irish. And I'm also very interested, and that was why our movie, My Son Hunter, which you can watch at mysonhuntermovie.com, is not making fun of Hunter Biden's addiction. It's funny, it's making fun of his enablers, of which Kevin Morris is one. And Morris was quite open then, when he thought he could control the video, that he is a recovering drug addict. But here, he's only described as a recovering alcohol addict. So then they have much in common. Both hail from tight-knit Irish Catholic families in towns south of Philadelphia. Morris is about 7 years older than Biden. They both attended high schools whose sports teams competed against each other. I like this. Both were lawyers living in Los Angeles who, in middle aged, had turned to creating art. Look, Hunter Biden is as much a lawyer as I am. He's never practiced law. He got $5 million from a Chinese businessman to represent his client in some kind of criminal matter where he was arrested for spying, but did nothing, just took the money. The Chinese, I suppose, thought they were bribing him to get the charges dropped. He took the money and ran. When he was working for Burisma, he never brought any legal assets to the table. So, in middle age, to turn to creating art. Well, we've seen Hunter Biden's. I mean, actually, it's very interesting. We spent this morning having a conversation with a woman who really appreciated art, right?
That's right.
And she liked the Impressionists, and she liked more modern art. Now, she also liked the Renaissance art. And we'll tell you what it is. She was a Jewish woman sitting in a safe house on October 7th, realizing that her husband had been murdered, realizing that she was probably going to be murdered. And she said, if I don't do something here, I'm going to suffer from PTSD. She was a therapist for the rest of my life. So she started, I said, meditating and disassociating. So she went to every...
In her mind, she went to the galleries that she had visited when she was free and not obviously holed up in a safe room in her house, trying to survive, knowing that her husband had been shot dead at the gates of the kibbutz that they lived at. And she visited all these galleries, and she described to us in detail these paintings from the Uffizi, from galleries in Barcelona, from galleries in Berlin, and from galleries, by the way, in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. I mean, she was just extraordinary.
It's an amazing story, and which we will bring in you more of.
Anon.
But I remember thinking about it when I read this line. I remember thinking about that. I was thinking, she talked a lot about Picasso. Now, Picasso, I know people who hate Picasso, and I know people who love Picasso. And his modern art, you could call it whatever you want to call it. But she pointed out his pictures of doves. She remembered his pictures of doves. He spent months, years drawing single doves, right? And then he included the doves in his paintings as part of the background. There's no doubt about it. Picasso could paint a dove, right? He could paint real figures. He could paint, he could paint something you recognize what it is. Then he went on to modern art. And all the great modern artists, Klee, all those people, you can see that these are real artists. They can paint. They can represent things. They have an artistic eye. They can represent what that is on the canvas. There's no indication that Hunter Biden is any way of an artist, and certainly his modern art seem to be the dabblings of a spoiled brat. Could be wrong. Modern art, of course, is in the eye of the beholder, but he hasn't served an apprenticeship, let me say, creating art. And anyway, I want to move on. Kevin Morris is not creating art either. Kevin Morris is creating political propaganda. For years, this camera crew had been following Biden and filming his travails for a documentary that Morris had backed. The documentary is not a real documentary. Maybe they will now finally create a documentary, but the documentary was an excuse to get on our movie set, my son Hunter movie set, to try and find out dirt on us to damage our movie and to bolster Hunter Biden's case in the court of law and the court of public opinion. They lied to get on our set, Kevin Morris, Bindler and Cohn, the three
And
amigos.
the very significant lie, obviously, that Kevin Morris constantly repeated was by not repeating constantly that he actually was a legal representative for Hunter Biden. He never represented himself to us as that. And that actually is an ethical breach, which is a reason why you did bring an ethical complaint against him to the Bar Association of California, right, Phil?
Let me just tell you how Matt Hamilton, by the way, reports on this. The problem, I suppose, with doing these in-depth reports is you come across stuff that's not good, not very, it doesn't reflect well on the person you're writing about. And the problem with that is then how do you cover that? And what you just do is you downplay it. So here's the way he describes this. Morris, Morris and and the documentary crew also travelled to Serbia in the fall of 2021. Travelled to Serbia, sure. Who doesn't travel to Serbia, right? There they visited the set. It's like, hey guys, visit the set of where an Irish-born filmmaker, Phelim Scoop, that's about the only accurate thing in the article, was shooting My Son Hunter, a film caricaturing the Biden family that was distributed by the conservative news outlet Breitbart. The film is directed by Robert Davi, a Hollywood veteran. The film was written by Brian Godawa, who has written some of the greatest. He wrote To End All Wars, which is the movie that should have been made by Zamparelli. It stars Lawrence Fox, who is a veteran.
You're
British,
reading. You're
British,
not reading from the.
No. So this is me
right, okay.
talking. This is me talking to Matt Hamilton. He described it as a film caricaturing the Biden family. So.
And he leaves out. So what I think, not clear what you were saying there, but basically you're saying that it leaves out the fact that it was directed by veteran Hollywood star Robert Davi. Is that what you're saying? And Lawrence Fox.
I spent a couple of days with him, said McAleer, explaining that he allowed Morris and his film set on the crew and even dined with the documentary's director and cameraman. Morris, by the way, I got this corrected. I don't know why it's still there. I didn't dine with the director. I dined with Bindler and Cohn, not with Morris. Morris told McAleer he was a recovering addict and he was retiring from law and pursuing his love of documentaries. Yes, he did tell me he was returning from law and pursuing his love of documentaries, but he told me he was a recovering drug addict, not alcohol addict. Then he said, I became wary when he started asking about the history of the laptop. And then says, McAleer said he was misled, and McAleer filed a complaint with the state agency that regulates attorneys in California. How benign. It sounds like the state agency that regulates attorneys in California. I have an ethics complaint again with the California Bar Association, who have the power to yank his legal license. And it's under very specific parts of the California Bar ethics code of conduct, where you are not allowed to approach a third party without informing them that you're there as the legal representative of another party. So you're not allowed to ask me questions about your client's case without saying I'm actually the lawyer for the case. And of course, there's obvious reasons for that. Because if you could sidle up to someone in a bar and fill them full of drink and ask them all these, as they did with me over dinner, only I don't drink, but you could have filled me with drink over the dinner and not let me know that you're part of a legal team that's gathering evidence. And that's why there's those protections there. So he rode coaching horses through them. So look, don't bother reading it. It's a soft soap. There's not much new in it, except he got Joe Biden to phone. Hunter Biden got Joe Biden to phone Kevin Morris's stepfather on the death of his mother.
To sympathise.
Sympathise. Yes. It's like, okay, that's a good use of Joe Biden's time, I suppose. But anyway, look, we're going to keep on the Kevin Morris trail. We're going to keep on the Hunter Biden trail. You've made it possible. Thank you very much. What else is on the show, Ann?
So we're going to be going over to an interview in a moment with Dan Phelim. You have to help me out here. Dan
Bartkowiak.
Dan Bartkowiak of the Pennsylvania Family Institute. This is an amazing story, by the way. This is just an extraordinary story that the Pennsylvania Family Institute have reported on. And basically they've discovered that the Pennsylvania Department of Health have reported, of course, in one of those, if deep into their website, you find this report that
get rid of the cobwebs.
Yeah. Like if you really dig and dig and dig, and this is what they did, you'll find they have a report that half of Pennsylvania's abortion facilities, half of them, were cited for very serious violations. And it's an incredible thing that the list is extraordinary. And these infractions, by the way, range from using ketamine as a general anaesthetic to unqualified doctors to aborted baby parts being kept in freezers for months. Does that sound familiar to you, Phelim?
Yes.
And things about biohazard waste being incorrectly and also facilities not keeping any record of the consent for minors having abortions. So extraordinary stuff, right? That just and of course it caught our eye because of the fact that we've written the book about Gosnell, we have made the movie, the play, the exhibition now, and one of the, obviously the Gosnell case is extraordinary in all kinds of ways, but one of the most, awful parts of it is that it shouldn't have happened. It should never have happened, because there were complaints upon complaints upon complaints
And
for
dead body
years
and dead
and
bodies.
years and years and years. There were complaints, and including the death of 2 women who had died after botched abortions there. But there were very serious complaints made, some of them written by hand, and some of them written by hand and hand delivered by people who had actually worked inside the clinic, and nothing was ever done. And Harrisburg, were horrific. And the grand jury report into what happened at the Gosnell Clinic was scathing, was really scathing about how they felt the Department of Health had handled these complaints. In fact, and I'll read this from the from the grand jury report, because I think it really
Gosnell,
is
and
worth.
this report is like 15 years old, but now
Yeah,
almost 12 years
The
old.
State Department of Health neglected its duty. So this is back then from Gosnell. The Department of Health neglected its duty to ensure the health and safety of patients in Pennsylvania's abortion clinics. We discovered that Pennsylvania's Department of Health has deliberately chosen not to enforce laws that should afford patients at abortion clinics the same safeguards and assurances of quality health care as patients of other medical services providers. And then the famous line that came out of this was, even nail salons in Pennsylvania are monitored more closely for client safety. And it kind of went on and on and on about that. But, we just thought this was an extraordinary story. We were very grateful to the Pennsylvania Family Institute for actually pointing this out, but we thought we'll let's talk to the guys there, find out what they've discovered, and this is
Let's go over to that interview we did earlier with
right
Dan Bartkowiak, and let's go over to that interview now. So we're here now with Dan Bartkowiak, the Director of Communications with the Pennsylvania Family Institute. They have examined in details the reports that found in words that are very familiar to us, found that half of Pennsylvania's abortion clinics failed a health inspection in 2020. So welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us about your recent report on the state of abortion clinics in Pennsylvania? What was it based on, and what did you find when you analyzed the various documents? What did you find? Tell us about the documents and tell us what was in them.
Yeah, well, it's coming directly from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, and they certainly have a history. And fellow Mann, full well everything with Kermit Gosnell and just the House of Horrors and the atrocities that happened because of our state departments, particularly the Department of Health. They stopped inspecting because of political reasons, and frankly, I'd say we're still playing politics here in Pennsylvania. If you look at the inspection reports for any of the abortion facilities, there's 18 abortion facilities in Pennsylvania, because they are now classified as ambulatory surgical facilities, which was over a year's worth of work through the legislature finally to get that passed, to really help shore up what took place with Kermit Gosnell, to say that they're performing surgery, they should be treated just like any other surgical facility. And that includes mandated inspections. Well, it's been an all too common thing of failing health inspections. And this past year, 2022, or 2023, forgive me, they had 9 of their facilities fail a health inspection. So 9 of the 18, half of Pennsylvania's abortion facilities failed a health inspection. And certainly the degrees of failures range. I mean, there's some that they failed to report a quote unquote serious event, which appears to be a botched abortion. They were using unsanitized medical equipment. There was lack of teachings for facility members. There was, frankly, laws broken in terms of consent forms for patients. How they discharged patients was under regulation. I mean, it just spanned a gamut of a variety of failings. And yet, that's half of your abortion facility. So I think it was ironic the way you started saying where the source was. It was Pennsylvania Department of Health. Many pro-abortion people that I bring this up to, they're shocked at saying, well, that can't be right. That's not true. Because when you see half of a entity failing their inspections, it kind of gives that impression that, boy, something's wrong. Well, that's Pennsylvania's abortion facility.
We'll go to the details of the report later on, the more details. But, obviously, if you run a restaurant in Pennsylvania or a nail salon and you fail a health inspection, you're obviously closed, right away, because that would be dangerous for people to be there. So obviously these abortion clinics have been closed. Yeah.
Well, that's what's infuriating is these abortions, not only will they fail, but sometimes they'll fail repeated infractions. And yet the only thing that happens is a point of correction to say, hey, don't do it again. And then if they do it again, hey, don't do it again. I mean, there's been no fine, there's been no shutdown of any of Pennsylvania's abortion facilities. Yet you're exactly right. If this was a different industry, it would be a different story. And again, that's why we're playing politics here in Pennsylvania when it comes to the abortion industry.
It's interesting, actually, reading through the various complaints in the different facilities. I mean, it's so reminiscent of the Gosnell case. It's unbelievable, even down to the biohazard bags being mentioned, and and unsterilized needles being taken out of their sterile cases and then inappropriately housed. Just even that stuff. But then, of course, there's this serious infraction which they don't go into details of. But you're saying your information is that this was possibly a botched abortion. Is that correct?
Yes, it was the Planned Parenthood York. The phrase that they used was it was failed to report a serious event. Well, it seems what we've seen with records, serious event is often the botched abortion, and needing to call ambulance, getting hospitals and so often Planned Parenthood has been reluctant to both report that, but also to try to get any other entity involved. It was a couple years ago, in Allentown abortion facility in Allentown, Pennsylvania. There was a botched abortion. This 18-year-old comes in. She's bleeding after an abortion. And instead of calling an ambulance, they tried to do another procedure. And she's reporting 10 out of 10 pain. And finally, they went to a hospital. So they didn't follow protocol there. They were never shut down. They were never, lost a day of business. And yet they continue to do these infractions. And right. So it was the Planned Parenthood York, this most recent one, that they didn't even report it as they were supposed to with ambulatory surgical facility standards.
Is it possible that in that case there was a fatality? Is that possible or not?
Well, I think when you look at the current administration that we're in, we have a governor that frankly wants to do the bidding of Planned Parenthood in the abortion industry. And so in terms of any kind of follow-up, in terms of any type of improved regulation, that's not what Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry wants. They want to remove any of these standards. And that's what we're seeing with the current administration as well.
Did any mainstream media outlet in Pennsylvania run this story as a front page news story? Because this is a huge story.
It should be a huge story. And no, there was no media outlet covering it. Even again, the majority of abortion facilities failed health inspections in past years, and never have there been really a mainstream media covering it. And I'd especially say this should be front page news with regards to the current administration. This should be, it was political reasons when you go back to Gosnell for not inspecting clinics. We should be doing all that we can to allow women, families to be able to report things happening, to have these reporting measures in place. And it's our governor, instead of doing that for abortion facilities, he actually this year set up a complaint form specifically for pregnancy resource centers, because that's what the industry wants. He removed their funding unilaterally. We fund family planning services as well as alternatives to abortion here in Pennsylvania. And that's been for decades put in by Governor Casey back decades ago. And he unilaterally removed the contract that was giving for pregnancy centers any funding, yet we continue in the tens of millions of dollars fund family planning here in Pennsylvania.
Rather than go after abortion clinics that are flagrantly and often breaching health standards, he's going after crisis pregnancy centers that are not breaking any laws or any regulations.
You're exactly right. And again, it's frankly politics at its worst. And again, I underscore back that first grand jury report looking at Gosnell. It was for political reasons they stopped inspecting abortion settings. It's for political reasons that we're attacking pregnancy centers.
I just want to say something. I mean, it's often an allegation made. This was done for political reasons. That was done for political reasons. I mean, this was actually, and sometimes it's unspoken politics, but in this case, in the Gosnell case, it was an actual political decision. Up until then, the law said, and the law continued to say, that every abortion clinic had to be inspected physically, boots on the ground, once a year. uh, Tom Ridge, a Republican governor, a pro-choice Republican governor, got into power, became a governor in Pennsylvania, and said these inspections end now. And then that meant Gosnell was able to Gosnell's clinic was not physically inspected for 17 years, and he was allowed to kill and kill and kill and kill again. I think 2 women died. Thousands of babies died in those 17 years.
Well, it's interesting, even in that context of that Phelim is describing, obviously, even though he stopped the inspections, there was within the regulations the provision that, if something serious happened, obviously the Department of Health would respond. And I think it's important not to brush over the fact that 2 women did die. And I think that's really the one that I always hone in on. 2 women died, Samika Shaw and Carnamaya Monger. One a Bhutanese refugee, another a young African-American mother. Neither of those cases rose to a level where the Department of Health in Harrisburg thought it worth their while to leave the office. To leave the office in the case of 2 dead women and do an inspection. So in some ways, what you're reporting on, that the Department of Health are reporting on, by the way, but it's obviously buried there and no one cares except for people like yourselves. There are very serious infractions happening up to the level we don't know about whether or not the very serious infraction that's contained in that report rose to the level of death. We don't know, but what we do seem to know is that really there's been no action taken. No facility has closed. No facility in Pennsylvania has closed, despite very serious infractions in a state that has a very, very particular history in this issue.
Well, I mean, they close oil and gas rigs in the whole of Dimmock, Pennsylvania. Even though there was no water has not been affected. The EPA said the water is safe to drink. They stopped you drilling for oil and gas in a 6 mile area, 6 mile squared area, over allegations. Science said there's nothing wrong with the water, but they still stopped it. So tell us about how they're treating abortion clinics then.
Yeah, I think, it comes to mind when you're bringing up Gosnell and our history here in Pennsylvania, reminding, yes, there were the women that died, and then looking at so many of the babies. He reported to the Pennsylvania over 40,000 abortions over his time. I mean, it's 5 abortions every day for 22 years. It's just sick when you look at what took place at his house of horrors. And yet here in Pennsylvania, yes, there was action that was immediately taken in terms of the ambulatory surgical status. And that's what the industry is fighting tooth and nail to remove, because they put profits over anybody's health. But yet there was some good action taken there. We just continue seeing the attacks really on anything outside of allowing for abortion on demand, unrestricted, with frankly no inspections needed. That's what the abortion industry wants, and that's what our current governor here, Josh Shapiro, continues to do. It was the number one priority of the industry to remove funding from pregnancy centers. He did that unilaterally. And again, I think the really thing that underscores it to me is we are in the midst of, the half of abortion facilities failing health inspections. That's documented evidence of harming women in Pennsylvania. And yet he has the gall to say, we're going to set up a complaint form specifically for pregnancy care centers, not for anybody that deals with pregnancy, not for abortion facilities, but ones that haven't had any type of documented harm against any women. There's not some big case happening right now in Pennsylvania that is calling for this. It's the fact that Planned Parenthood has specifically stated they want to shut down pregnancy centers. They want to completely shut down every single one is what their main goal is. And defunding their facilities was their number one priority this session. And that's what our governor delivered on. It's again, you're playing politics here in the state and not caring about women that are caring for babies.
So what are the Pennsylvania Family Institute doing about this? What's your strategy?
It's a great question. And I think one in particular is I appreciate you having me on your show. It's getting the word out about what's happening. It's doing the research to understand. Here's the reports that's happening. Our state just came out with the 2022 abortion statistics, as they call it. But it really looks at what abortion is happening in our state. And it continues to increase in our state. The amount of complications that are happening are rising. It's tripled in the last 5 years here in Pennsylvania. So it's really trying to make more people aware of what really abortion looks like in our state, to make sure that you can raise your voice against your elected officials to know what is happening in our state. I'd also say we're getting ready both nationally with the March for Life, and then here in our state, September 23rd is the Pennsylvania March for Life. which Ann, I appreciated you participated in, a couple years back. It's really, taking a public stand on this to say this is uncalled for. We shouldn't be attacking pregnancy centers. We should be, preventing some of these failed health inspections, doing things against abortion facilities. So there's certainly some actions taken that's needed, and we're trying to help foster some of that action.
Actually, another thing that just occurs to me, and I wonder, have you got an update on that? There has been talk that you're going to have a ballot initiative. Are you going to have a ballot initiative in Pennsylvania on this issue?
So there was, at that time, we were pointing at, there's frankly still a court case that's challenging the essentially taxpayer funding of abortion. Right now, we don't allow your taxpayer dollars to be used for abortion. And there's a court case, Allegheny Reproductive Health, an abortion facility in Pittsburgh, and really the entire abortion industry that has challenged that. The court case still is standing. There has not been a ruling to say if they are finding, quote unquote, a right to an abortion in our Constitution, which is not there. But you can certainly play politics there. And if a ruling happens, it would need something in our Constitution to say that there is not this right to an abortion in our state. But right now, there is not a push to see the state amendment passed in our state for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, yes, it's trying to really improve upon our laws. And one thing that may happen is this court case could rule to say that abortion's allowed through our state constitution, jeopardizing every state law that we have.
Well, thank you, Dan. Before we go, I just want to go back to something we talked about. You talked about Gosnell performing 40,000 abortions. Actually, no one knows how many abortions Kermit Gosnell performed. The 40,000 figure actually came out of his court case. That was the state expert that they brought in to show how a good abortion was done, and almost destroyed the case by showing how horrific real abortion is. But that's by the way. I mean, Gosnell, so he was asked, how many abortions have you done to prove, how big of an expert he was? And he said 40,000. And the jury gasped. The jury saw the most horrific photographs, heard the most horrific evidence from these murders. They never made one remark except when they heard that this guy had done 40,000 abortions, because they didn't realize the
industrial
scale of it. Gosnell, we don't know how many abortions Gosnell did because you're supposed to document every abortion and send it once a month to the Department of Health. He never bothered sending those documents off.
And they didn't follow up.
And they never bothered asking. So he was breaking the rules at the highest level by murdering people, and at the lowest level by not simply faxing or emailing a form to the Department of Health. I mean, it was neglect from bottom to top, and it wasn't benign neglect. It was poisonous, dangerous, and ultimately murderous neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's certainly, yes. It's wondering how many, especially from the later term abortions that were done. There was some reporting, and this is what we do. It's paper documents in the state library, which every abortion facility has to provide based on the Abortion Control Act. And so some of those numbers, that's where there were some reporting that he did, getting that 40,000 number. But yes, you're absolutely right to not know how many he performed because of just his disregard for any type of law.
He did the Sunday specials, as he called it, with him and his wife Pearl, and they were the ones up to 9 months that even
never were reported.
That even his own staff didn't know about. So I mean, look,
he took the files home.
He took the files home and then threw them away. Look, we could talk about this all day. Thanks very much, Dan, for coming on the show.
We'd
love to come back to Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Any excuse you have, any dinners you want us to speak at,
yeah.
We'll do bar mitzvahs, funeral.
Yeah.
We love. I mean, it sounds strange, right? And people might. We love talking about Kermit Gosnell. We have made a movie about him. We have made written a book about him. We've done a podcast. We've done a play. But it's a story that keeps on giving.
And an exhibition.
And a photographic exhibition. It's an amazing story, and people need to know more about it. It's a true crime story that tells you everything about crime and everything about America.
And that's what I appreciate about you both. You're making people know more about what took place.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Dan, bye.
Really appreciate it. Bye. It's very,
Sound familiar?
it sounds very familiar. It's very, very disappointing, and it's kind of scary. Basically nothing has been learned. And I think the other thing to bring to a conscious level here, and it's very important, is once we discovered this case, we got in touch ourselves. We got in touch with the Department of Health and asked them questions about this, asked them detailed questions about this report and about these violations and about what consequences had been met by these institutions that have failed women and children so badly. And guess what? Not even slightly shocking to me. We wrote and we got no response. And this has been a pattern with Pennsylvania. This has been a pattern. They don't feel they just don't bother answering questions. They are not accountable, and nothing has changed. And if nothing has changed, what is really going on? And it's very, very frightening. Yeah. Moving on, Phelim, to wolf nymphs. I love this story. This is a small thing I saw. Shockingly, Colorado has decided to reintroduce wild wolves. Of course, there's only one kind of wolf. Basically, to have a wolf reintroduction program. 10 wolves were released, but it's 10 of, I think eventually there's going to be 200 released. By the way, the places where they've released the wolves in Colorado are the places that voted against the wolves being released. And of course, those places are very rural places. Of course, Denver overwhelmingly and Boulder overwhelmingly voted for these wolves to be released. And a friend of ours, Greg Walsher, has written about this. He writes for the Natural Resource Group, and he just wrote a very funny essay that I thought was worth bringing to people's attention.
Because they have a competition now.
So they have a competition for middle schoolers to name the wolves. And here's what Greg says, and I just love this. He says, naming the wolves is much easier because their personalities are so predictable, even when they're puppies. So, and this is what he's saying, of course. So they're having competition, what will they call these wolves? Foreshadowing their behavior, appropriate names might include, and this is Greg, assassin, Baskerville, Blitz, Bully, Butcher, Executioner, Havoc, Hunter, Jaws, Jason, Killer, Mauler, Night Stalker, etc., Terminator. And here's an interesting thing that maybe everyone already knows this. Imagine they're asking young kids to name these, and all the kids are thinking of nice names, like the name they called their little doggy. But here's the truth about wolves. Wolves hunt in packs, often at night, and frequently kill more than they can eat. In other words, they are the animal version and the animal's serial killer. So it might be very catchy to give them names like Alphabet, Bundy, Leatherface, Ripper, Son of Sam, or Zodiac.
This is Greg Wallace is saying this in his essay. Walsher in the Natural Research. We're going to put a link to this essay in the show notes on YouTube.
It's very good.
Rather than have students give these wolves nice family-friendly names, they should teach students about wolves, about how cruel nature can be. I mean, I read an article about it. So they're deemed predators in Wyoming. So they can be shot on sight in Wyoming. Yeah. So wolves being wolves, they're going to wander over to the nearest open space they can get. And once they get too crowded for rather crowded Colorado, they're going to wander over to Wyoming, where they're going to be dispatched with extreme prejudice. Who wants wolves? I mean, honestly, who wants wolves? I don't want any coyotes. I mean, they shot a coyote over in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and the media coverage of it was like, you think they shot a child? I think the person deserves a medal. Yeah. I mean, these are kitty cat killing machines,
Yeah, and we won't have any kitty cat killing machines allowed in our neighborhood.
No, we're going now to an interview we did earlier with Aaron Sibarium. Aaron works for the Washington Free Beacon. And it's a great interview about journalism. He was really at the forefront of revealing the plagiarism article, or the plagiarism of Claudine Gay, and his drip journalism on that ultimately, I think, led to her resignation after Aaron just kept piling the evidence onto it. And it says a lot about DEI. It says a lot about education, but it also says a lot about journalism. So we're very happy to have Aaron. Let's go over to that interview now. And we're joined now by the journalist of the hour, Aaron Sibarium, who is a reporter at the Washington Free Beacon and one of the main reporters responsible for bringing down the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay. He's had a long career in journalism. Before joining the Free Beacon, he was an editor at the American Interests. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start at the start. Why are you a journalist?
It's funny. I enjoyed doing opinion journalism in college. I wrote for the school paper and also helped edit the opinion section. And I wanted to kind of keep doing that afterwards. So I was more focused on opinion, commentary, long form essays for a few years. But then I ended up coming to the Free Beacon and deciding to try my hand at reporting. And I discovered that reporting is both a lot of fun and also very valuable.
Yes.
Yes.
More valuable in many ways, I think, than the kind of take industry where the right has historically dominated. There hasn't been as much quality, conservative, or even just heterodox reporting. So once I started doing it and discovering that it could really make a difference and surface information that was important but not already public, I found that very gratifying and kept doing it. That's the long and short of it.
So how did you come across this story about Claudine Gay? How did that all start?
I can't really comment on sources, but I will just say that she was obviously under a lot of scrutiny in the wake of that, not just in the wake of the December 5th hearing on anti-Semitism, but really since October 7th, which I think raised a lot of broader questions about who is running these universities and are universities applying standards consistently, right? One of the critiques of the answers given by Dr. Gay and others in that disastrous hearing was that they claim to stick up for free speech, but these universities have been shutting down conservative points of view for the past decade with abandon. And you see that same kind of theme of double standards show up very much in this plagiarism story, where students are held to one standard, but then professors and even the president of the entire university is held to a very different, much looser standard.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think that would have been important and compelling, even absent all the context about anti-Semitism.
I mean, let's go back to the start, actually. So remind people, Claudine Gay and the president of MIT and the president of
Penn
were asked, is calling for the genocide of Jews
bullying
and harassment.
Yeah.
And see, the actual reality is, in an ideal world, funny enough, the calling for the genocide of, you could make an argument for calling for the genocide of Jews. Don't quote me on this. But you could make an argument calling for the genocide of Jews as a free speech absolutist, as acceptable, as allowable, not acceptable, as allowable, as a free speech absolutist. You could say that, right? If these people were, and I think that was the line they were going with. Well, as free speech absolutists, we have, it depends, only if it moves into action,
That's
people,
where the context.
It's like the ACLU defending neo-Nazis marching in Ohio in 1974. This is what makes American universities good. In that ideal world where they were long-bearing, fighters for free speech, you could see that this is just an extension of that. But they were not that. They were the killers of free speech.
Yes.
They were the killers of dissent. So they try to give this free speech. It depends on the context. And I think most people are not as free speech absolutists anyway. But given the context, to use a word, given a context of crushing conservative speech, harmless conservative speech for, as you say, a decade, they were shown to be hypocrites. Am I right in my analysis there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that even the people who thought that these university presidents gave legally correct and defensible answers were struck by that hypocrisy. And it also, I think, really constrained their ability in the hearing, quite frankly, to prosecute the free speech argument more aggressively. They did say, they kind of tried to stake out a middle ground position, which was it depends on context. They could have been much more bellicose and just told Elise Stefanik, the Republican who was asking them questions, you know what? we allow people calling for the genocide of Jews, and we allow them calling for the genocide of any other group. And here's a list of the other really offensive things that we allow.
Yeah.
But of course, they couldn't proactively say that because we all know that they don't allow it. And if they did say or claim that they, in fact, permitted such speech, they know that they'd have a riot on their hands on campus from various activist groups. So they were really caught in a bad situation.
Didn't Fire give them, didn't they get from Fire, I think, I don't know what the acronym exactly stands for, but I believe that they got a score of abysmal. They got the worst score, this is Harvard, got the worst score imaginable, the lowest score for free speech in I think last year.
Yeah, literally a 0.
Yeah, but what's extraordinary is that, that should have been a huge story that should have been covered by the mainstream, and it took this genocide conversation for the mainstream to become aware of just how awful these institutions were. I might be jumping ahead a little bit in the conversation, but it seemed to have, in some ways, the genocide was a catalyst for an opening of this conversation, which is well overdue, about these campuses claiming to be bastions of free speech when in fact they're the exact opposite.
Yeah, so I think we've set the context.
We've
set the context of her remarks now. So she left Congress. Actually, I bet she left Congress feeling pretty good about herself. And if you look, we covered it last week in the stories. Actually, if you look at the coverage of their congressional testimony in the mainstream media, it was all very glowing, and NBC and NPR framed it as, university leaders standing up for free speech against the outrageous slings and arrows of this dreadful Stefanik person. Yes, and other people, right? And then they interviewed some students saying, "What do you think about free speech?" And it's very difficult. They all, as they say in Scooby-Doo, they almost got away with it if it wasn't for that pesky billionaire Bill Ackman, who then clipped, or someone clipped the genocide bit and put it up on Twitter, and that's what took off, and that got around the mainstream media and brought the debate back and put the spotlight on these three individuals who give these robotic answers that were scripted by some law firm at $1,500 an hour.
Yes.
And then that put the spotlight on Claudine Gay, and I think it was Chris Rufo who first published plagiarism allegations, but it then emerged that there was plagiarism allegations before that from the New York Post. They got a 13-page letter from a law firm, a $1,500 an hour law firm,
quashing that story.
Terrorizing
them.
And that it emerged that Harvard had done a fake independent investigation into it and obviously cleared her. So then you came in. Is that the way of the story? Is that the timeline?
Yeah. So basically the timeline I would summarize like this. The New York Post reaches out to Harvard in late October with a number of anonymous plagiarism allegations. Harvard responds with this crazy threat of defamation through the law firm Claire Locke. It does that before it has completed, even initiated any kind of probe of the allegations, right? So when it sends this letter, it says the allegations are demonstrably false, but we later learn that they hadn't even begun investigating the allegations until a few days after that letter was sent, which is pretty crazy.
It's like that. It's almost like a religious thing, The person is actually a saintly person and incapable of bad behavior. We know in advance that she wouldn't do this, so we're going to send you a 13-page lawyer's letter. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So they do that, and then I think they send another letter in early November reiterating that Harvard's official position is that these allegations are totally false, even though when they send that follow-up letter, they have by that point begun to investigate the allegations internally. They don't disclose that to the Post, of course. And then I think it's Sunday, December 10th, Chris Rufo publishes the initial allegations. Monday, December 11th, we publish quite a few more. I mean, we probably publicized about a dozen examples and made reference to over a dozen others. And then it kind of snowballs from there, right? Harvard initially the Harvard Corporation releases a statement on December 12th saying we stand behind Gay and we've already investigated these allegations and they're not a big deal. There were a couple instances of inadequate citation and duplicative language. That's what they said, and she's correcting them, but just a few, no biggie. Then there's a complaint. I want to say the date of that is December 19th. That contains 40 allegations of plagiarism, including those already reported by myself and Chris Rufo, as well as several others. And then by December 27th, according to the New York Times, Gay has agreed to resign privately. January 1st, we published 6 additional allegations, and January 2nd, she's gone.
I just want to go back. So yours was you came in after Rufo. Rufo did 4, but you did a dozen or 2 dozen?
Ultimately, we probably published, the initial piece only detailed a dozen, I think, or somewhere around that. But then we published a follow-up piece that had 40, including the dozen that we reported already, as well as many more.
Wow.
So you had 40. You had 40 allegations of plagiarism, and they still held on at that stage. Was that, did they release the? When did they release the statement?
The full confidence statement, after there had been about 12 of these, well, more than 12, because Rufo's and mine. So they released the full confidence statement after maybe 15, 16 of these allegations were public, as well as, and then in my piece, I said, we analyzed 29 possible cases of plagiarism. So they knew that there were like almost 30 out there, although we didn't cover every single one of them. But then, so after all of that, they still said they had full confidence. But then this complaint comes with 40 plus allegations. And that, I think, really, tips the scales.
Who submitted that complaint?
It was a complaint submitted to the university.
And what's the nature of these? I mean, are they minor infractions? Are they
duplicative language?
Duplicative language, which is, I think, the new phrase that they've invented just to cover for this plagiarism.
There was a range. Some of these examples were pretty minor, and I think on their own would have been nothing burgers, right? If you just said, oh, this paragraph is kind of too closely paraphrased, and she maybe should have included a citation, but she wasn't copying the exact language, and she did that once, I mean, no one would care. But some of the allegations were more serious. In a few cases, she lifted entire paragraphs or close to entire paragraphs verbatim without attribution. In a couple cases, she didn't even list the authors anywhere in the bibliography. So it wasn't just that she lacked quotation marks or parenthetical citations. It was like the author was just nowhere to be found, credited anywhere in her work. And, it was also the pattern, right? There was sort of a drip, and any one of these things, even the worst examples on their own, might not have been that big a deal. We all make mistakes. But when there's, maybe 6 to a dozen serious cases with another, 30 not as serious cases, but still taken collectively kind of serious cases, that starts to suggest a pattern that's hard to ignore.
To use the word of the moment, I think there's a context here as well. That Claudine Gay was not the world's greatest scholar either. She was not the world's most productive scholar.
Mm-hmm.
She had written 11 papers and no books, right? If you'd written 40 books and
150
pages in a distinguished academic career,
yes,
and you had 40,
yes,
as you say, 12 serious cases and 30 bad cases, people go, well, that's not even one a paper. That's every 10 papers he's misattributed something, or in a book of 120,000 words there's a couple of this would have all got lost in the wash. But when you've published 11 papers,
I agree,
11 papers, and a paper is is a few thousand words, maybe even less, and you have 40 examples that we know of right now, then it gets to be serious. Then it's showing that you're cutting corners for a not very impressive academic career.
Exactly. I think it was the percentage that the percentage of her work that contained plagiarized material was pretty high. And that's really a big part of what made it hard to ignore. There have been other Harvard scholars who've been caught up in plagiarism scandals, but all of them had much more voluminous academic records and were usually only accused of plagiarism in one of their works or speeches. And so none of those professors faced any real punishment, at most a slap on the wrist. But for all of those people, you could say, well, it was a very small percentage of their published work. These are very impressive scholars. Harder to make that argument with Claudine Gay. And again, Claudine Gay was the president of the entire institution, not just a professor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of jumping all over the place, but it goes to the very the original sin here. Actually, was the appointment of Claudine Gay, who was an unimpressive human being and an unimpressive scholar. She was a DEI hire, a quota hire, a virtue signal hire. She was not hired because of her impressive academic record. She was not hired because of her impressive administrative record. She was not hired because of her impressive leadership abilities. So they left themselves open to these. If they'd hired someone with 150 papers and 10 books behind them, then they would have not left themselves open to this kind of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, here's an illustrative statistic that I think really gets at the contrast. Peter Salvi, who's the president of Yale University, I have plenty of issues with his leadership, but he has published around, I want to say maybe 13 books, I don't know, and over 300 papers, including some of the most cited papers in all of psychology. He basically invented the concept of emotional intelligence. So this guy, by the time he became the president of Yale, was one of the top psychologists in the world. I mean, even taking the most charitable possible interpretation of Claudine Gay's work, no one would say that she is among the top political scientists in the world. Absolutely no one. And she's not on any list of the most influential political or social science academics in the world. None. It is very obvious. She's just not fundamentally an academic. She was fundamentally an administrator, a kind of career administrator.
However, I mean, what's kind of, worrying actually in a way is, okay, she has lost the top job, but she is still faculty at Harvard. So she's still retaining a job that should obviously be held by somebody who is, at the very least of it, an illustrious academic, which now has been proven to not be the case with her. But now she gets to retain this job at this massive salary of $900,000. It makes, I mean, obviously this is opening a huge can of worms about who exactly is working in all these academic jobs, right?
Right. And I think that to be fair to her and Harvard, you would be stunned by how much mediocrity just is tenured. How many mediocre professors receive tenure at these institutions? I mean, she's maybe an exceptional case, but it's not like she's the only person who I think has done not very much or not very impressive academic work who ends up getting a high level position. It definitely happens at Harvard and other universities. But B, and I think this is maybe the more important point, to be fair to them, they've never punished a professor for plagiarism. They have punished students, but they really never punished a professor. So if they stripped her of tenure and fired her, that would be unprecedented and would in fact represent a kind of double standard, at least vis-a-vis the faculty. So frankly, I don't really see how they could fire her for plagiarism without her suing them, because she could absolutely say that this is a double standard. Possibly she would allege that it was racist, but she wouldn't even have to go that far. She would just say, look, breach of contract, you promise us fairness in the handbook, and what I did was not, appreciably worse than what these other professors did. I think it arguably was a little worse, but still, none of those professors were sanctioned at all. So they really can't fire her. I mean, I think there's a deeper question here of whether they should have let those other professors off the hook to begin with, especially when students get such serious punishment. That's a totally fair question. But given But given that the facts are as they are, you know, I think it's tough to yeah.
There's another, talking about unprecedented, there's another aspect of this story that is just mind blowing, actually. That a lot of journalists have decided, we're quite open, we will not be following this story up because it was first publicized, first scooped by right-wing journalists, by conservative journalists, by conservative outlets, by conservative activists. Let's just say, let's just start off. Well, I mean, most of the people listening to this won't be journalists, but even they who are not journalists will know that is deeply weird and deeply wrong. It doesn't I mean, it's almost, I feel like I feel stupid saying this, and I feel like I'm treating people as stupid saying this, So all the people out there, it doesn't matter if the source of your story is the basest beggar in the street, right? You check out your sources, you confirm what they've told, you get backup evidence, and you run with the story. And it doesn't matter
where it came from.
Yes. If it's true and if it's important, you run with it. But you tell me what it was like to be told your journalism wasn't worth following up, or wasn't real journalism because somehow your outlet was perceived as conservative or right-wing.
Look, I mean, I'm not surprised that people give me that kind of argument. I candidly don't really care very much that people say that sort of thing. It's unfortunate, but I to be honest, people dismissed Rufo and some of his initial allegations, but then CNN reported on a lot of the ones I covered, and so did the New York Times, so did other places. And I think they actually, once they started to cover the story, did take it very seriously. More seriously in some ways than I expected them to. So yeah, look, people are always going to use the you're just a right-wing hack argument, but in this case, I don't really think that argument worked, because the strength of the examples was just so strong, and there was the visual component too. You could just look at her work and other people's work side by side. It's just very hard to deny what happened here. So I don't give too much thought to stuff like that.
So my question is, where does this go to now? Where does this story go to now? So obviously there's been some resolution in the sense that Claudine Gay is gone now, and sort of we've moved on from Harvard, or have we? Because I feel like Ackman is asking some other questions and has now said that he's going to open up the book on MIT and make, put all of their academics through the same rigor that Claudine Gay got. Where does this go? For you, where does this story go?
And the board? What about the board?
For you, where does this story go?
Well, I'm obviously very interested in covering other scandals like this, and I suspect there will be other scandals like this now that people have seen the potency of plagiarism allegations, for good or ill, right? There are arguments against kind of creating a norm in which everyone's academic work going back years is scrutinized religiously for any possible infelicity or inadequate citation. I understand why people intuitively may balk at that or have questions about whether that's really desirable. But I suspect we may be about to discover that this kind of low-level plagiarism is very common in academic work. I do think that will affect scholarly norms going forward. And look, it also may just in the course of that renewed scrutiny, we may find much more serious examples than even Claudine Gay's, right? I'm sure there's much more extreme plagiarism out there that has yet to be uncovered, and I'm interested in covering all of it.
I think one thing that you said earlier that I thought that I picked up on that I thought would be an it's an interesting path to pursue, is that this story has sort of revealed a lot of mediocrity at the highest levels of academia in Ivy League colleges. And I mean, I'm asking, Is that, I mean, I presume you've thought about this a little bit. Would you say that mediocrity is born of DEI? Did this start with DEI, or was it always there? Was there always some kind of mediocrity that got promoted to the highest levels? That would seem very odd. But I can imagine DEI allowing it because you're overlooking the academic performance, and you're looking mostly at skin color.
Well, academic excellence is racist.
There you go. So what do you think about that, the mediocrity story? Where does that go?
I do think that DEI is part of this, and I'm sure this will only increase the scrutiny on DEI programs and non-merit-based hiring. But I actually think that there's another side of the story too, which is the rise of the professional administrator at these elite institutions. 50 years ago, someone like Claudine Gay just wouldn't have a job because there wasn't all this administrative bloat, and you couldn't spend your entire kind of scholarly career rising through the ranks of various deanships and administrative positions as she did. It just wasn't a thing to the same degree. And now that you have this bloat, this bureaucratic bloat on college campuses, that's resulted in the creation not just of new offices, but of an entirely new kind of career, like an entirely new professional mold that I think diverts resources away from scholarship. And in many ways, Claudine Gay, I think, is an avatar for that transformation in higher education. She got her job not just maybe because of DEI, but because there was this entire coterie of positions, administrative, non-scholarly positions for her to fill. But she turned out to not be a very serious scholar, and that I think is the story, or one of the stories, of higher education in a nutshell. Sort of the transfer of resources from scholarship to administration, and I think that is bad, and it's good that also is getting more sunlight on it.
That's an excellent point. We have to kind of wrap up now, but that's an excellent point, and it's kind of like, when you're too young probably to remember this, but when we were young, you were told, when you were 20 and you were idealistic, well, as soon as you go out into the workforce, you'll realize there's no jobs for that in that, there's no future in that, and you'll become conservative by going out in the workplace. But we've got this whole generation of people now who are in that industry, in the same industry. They started an industry in their 20s, their ideology in their 20s, and they can just work right through that, never having changed their opinions until retirement, whether it's in the climate bureaucracy or the environmental bureaucracy, the DEI bureaucracy, the medical bureaucracy, the administrative bureaucracy. So we are now creating a self-sustaining industry in across the world that allows these bad ideas to fester
and perpetuate
and grow. Listen, last question. As you say, you really enjoy doing original journalism. One of our biggest complaints is that there's not enough right-wing or conservative original journalism. That it's all, a lot of conservatives think journalism is writing about what the New York Times, the most outrageous thing that the New York Times just wrote, and we do that on this program ourselves. But there's a real need for original journalism, and when we say original, we don't mean original punditry. We mean digging and diving.
No, I completely, I agree completely, and I think that this just goes to show that look, doing a reported story like, exclusive, New York Times publishes something stupid. I mean, that's not a story, right? Like who cares? We all know that the New York Times publishes stupid things. I think you need people who will actually go and dig into this kind of the kind of rot of our institutions, and do so using the tools of typical mainstream investigative journalism, and also holding oneself to the same standards of mainstream outlets. I mean, it's one thing I think it's fine to do the reporting from a particular point of view and to be upfront about that, but just having the point of view does not justify, throwing out journalistic standards and norms. And in fact, I'd argue that when people do that, it tends to make the reporting a lot less impactful. And so it's actually very important that you hold yourself to high standards.
Okay, well, Aaron, thank you very much for coming on the show. Great,
Thank you, Aaron.
Great stories. I hope you have many more of them.
Yeah, we'll be watching.
And we'll be watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we intend to do a lot more original journalism. That's what we want to do as well, and that's why we were in Israel. But you can help us do the more journalism. It costs money. It's expensive. It doesn't cost much to sit and rant about what's in the New York Times. It costs money to go and do original research in Israel, or to go and search out original records and maybe not find a story, and then find a story and not find a story. So give what you can to the unreportedstoriesociety.com. We will use it to create mischief and to tell great stories. You can be guaranteed on that. Are we doing the?
Well, I thought we were going to. I just wanted to bring people's attention to anyone who didn't read this from the Wall Street Journal, because I think it really is. And obviously, as you know, we're working on a big Israel project this year, a huge project, one of the biggest projects we've ever done. But I thought maybe if you hadn't read this from the Wall Street Journal, I think it's really important. And the headline basically is "Your Aid Dollars for Palestinian Terrorists." And as I said, this is from the Wall Street Journal editorial board, who have pointed out that the US and Europe's aid to Palestine is going towards stipends for Hamas martyrs, aka terrorists. And this is
October 7th terrorists.
Yes. So according to a report in the Wall Street Journal, martyrs, wounded and prisoners, Palestinian terrorists or their families, in other words, will receive their November stipends starting this Saturday via the Palestinian Post Bank. So they're going to get it basically from the Postal Service in Palestine. Before October 7, terrorists can be rewarded. Their families must submit paperwork for proof of martyrdom and power of attorney to open a bank account. Unless something changes, a salary will be sent to reward the family of the terrorist who was recorded calling home on October 7th to tell his mother, "I killed 10 Jews with my own hands."
The guy who's gleeful, Mum, look at the WhatsApp pictures.
And just to get the numbers on this, martyr families typically receive 1,400 shekels, almost $400 a month for life. Salaries for terrorist prisoners rise over time from 1,400 shekels to 12,000 shekels, or $3,300 a month. This pay for slave program costs more than $300 million a year, and the PA is showered with aid, including much of the more than $700 million a year that the European Union sends the Palestinians. President Trump stripped more than $200 million in aid in 2018, but Mr. Biden restored it in 2021 and has since sent more. So because of the American aid, because of the European aid, it's freeing up lots of money for Hamas, basically, to give rewards to their terrorists. And anti-Semitism, by the way, is all around, and even to the extent of in our own neighbourhood here. Look at this photograph I took just the other day on the Venice Pier. Horrible. Free Palestine, river to the sea. Israel Zionist exists for genocide.
That's why we're doing the Israel project. We're going to be announcing more details about it very soon. It's an amazing story, and it needs to be memorialized, and we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that it's kept in your mind, kept in people's minds going forward. So watch out for more details. So what are we going to be doing for the next few weeks, huh?
So yes, the podcast is going to look different for about the next 3 weeks. We are going to Washington, D.C. to attend the trial of Mark Steyn. But when you tune in to the podcast next week, you will be getting you'll see a little bit of us, but then you'll get to hear a lot of the Mark Steyn podcast.
So let's,
which will be actually its first day. The first day is on Tuesday next, and our podcast, as you know, comes out on Wednesday. So the first day of our Mark Steyn podcast is going to coincide with that, and it'll be on the Wednesday.
Yes.
And you remember what happened here? What this case is all about? This is a Mark Steyn is being sued for defamation by Michael Mann for criticising the famous hockey stick.
Yeah, over a decade ago, Mark wrote an opinion piece for the National Review saying that a graph, the famous hockey stick graph that predicts catastrophic global warming, it was bunk. And in fact, not only that, it says that the temperature was flat. So ignoring the medieval warming period, ignoring the Little Ice Age, was flat for 1,500 years and then suddenly shot up when the Industrial Revolution and evil Americans arrived on the scene. So Mann said, oh, that's terrible. I'm going to sue you for defamation. the trial, Mann has, through various legal maneuvers, has put off coming to trial for about 12 years now. It's finally going to court. This is both the climate trial of the century, but it's also the free speech of the century. Are we allowed to criticize experts? Or is free speech, does it still exist in America? If Mark Steyn loses this case, it's going to be dangerous for all of us. It's going to be dangerous for those who want to criticize experts, for those who want to call out fraud. It's a really, really, really important case. And it was
12 years in the making.
Yes, they kept delaying. It was supposed to start in November. The judge got sick, delayed it. Anyway, we'll
be there.
We're going to go there. We're going to pick the most dramatic. And Mark Steyn's representing himself. Mark has never lost a court case. Actually, let's play the trailer for the court.
Yeah, let's play that. It's a court case, 10 years in the making, about issues that will determine all our futures. Climate change and free speech are on trial in a DC courtroom.
On the one side is Michael Mann, a leading climate scientist whose hockey stick graph shook the world and propelled an anti-fossil fuel movement.
On the other side is Mark Steyn, a writer and free speech campaigner who's never lost a court case. Steyn has denounced the hockey stick graph as a scientific fraud and accused Penn State University of being part of the cover-up.
Now they will call their witnesses and make their case. This climate change trial will determine if it's okay to accuse a scientist of fraud and if free speech still exists in America. And it will ask if an apparently respected institution would cover up for a child rapist. Should we ever trust them again?
We're investigative journalists, Ann McElhenney and Phelim McAleer, and we're producing a daily podcast, Climate Change on Trial, with verbatim reenactments of the day's testimony. We'll bring you a courtroom drama every morning in your inbox. You'll hear the day's arguments thrashed out and the lies exposed as they happen.
Find Climate Change on Trial wherever you get your podcasts. Your future may very well depend upon it.
So please tune in next week.
That sums it up. Tune in next week. You'll be getting all the juicy details.
So we're about to finish, and I want to finish up with this very simple recipe, which is this elevated recipe for a nice midweek meal. And this is called...
Is there a theme to this recipe, Anne?
No, there's no. I don't think there's a theme to this recipe.
Not the country?
No, I don't think so. Not so much. No, it's not.
Okay.
It just happens to use a Korean. It's not a Korean dish. It happens to use a Korean ingredient, and it's very hard to pronounce that Korean ingredient. But anyway, here it is. It's sheet pan gochujang, chicken, and roasted vegetables. And here's what you're going to need.
How do you spell gochujang?
Gochujang.
Gochujang.
Which is a kind of a Korean condiment that has chilies in a kind of paste and oil, and it's very nice. And funny enough, I'm not sure, strictly speaking, the one that I've used is the one that should be used, but a really, really nice Korean chili, fried chili in oil paste that is very, very nice. So what you're going to do is I'm going to give you the instructions, and I've got this recipe will be up in the show notes
and on the website on reporterstorysociety.com.
First of all, heat up the oven to about 425 degrees. That takes a while. Then combine the Korean condiment gochujang with soy sauce, ginger, tablespoon of oil, and then you've patted dry your chicken, and then put the chicken into the bag and massage that around. And if you can, and if you've got time, we didn't, but I would recommend it, leave that for an hour.
Don't forget to season with salt.
Meanwhile, while you've got that marinating, while you've got your chicken marinating, cut up we got turnip and butternut squash, and cut them up into little cubes. I think our cubes are a little bit larger than they should have been. So make them nice and small little cubes, and it's not, basically the recipe had said 2 inches, but I would say we would change that and make them slightly smaller. Then you're going to get 2 sheet pans. Cover that with tin foil so you don't have too much washing up to do afterwards. That's really the reason for that. And then take your pieces of chicken out of the bag.
And these are
bone-in chicken thighs.
Skin-on
chicken thighs. I love those. And then into the same bag, by the way, throw all your vegetables. Give them a good running it with, get them kind of coated as much as you can with the sauce. Spread all of this out over the 2 sheet pans, because we were making food for quite a few people, and then put that in the oven and put that in the oven for 40 minutes. I would say 40 to 50 minutes and check for doneness. You want your vegetables to be nice and, very nicely done. Meanwhile, while that's all happening, cut your radishes into very thin slices and put your scallions and your radishes into a bowl. And into that bowl, you want to add rice wine vinegar and sesame oil. Now, if you don't have sesame oil, and we didn't, we used olive oil.
So
and
10,
lightly
10,
let that
10 scallion, 1 bunch of radishes.
Thank you.
2 tablespoons of rice vinegar and 1 tablespoon of
sesame oil
or olive oil.
Or olive oil. And let that soak. Let that soak while and it's not soaking really, it's pickling. Let that happen, and some salt, by the way. Let that happen while you are waiting on the chicken to be done. When the chicken's done, pull it out of the oven and sprinkle over the top of it the pickled radishes and the pickled, which is what we ate, Phelim. Yes. And look at the lovely photograph of it. And then serve that with rice.
Taken by your top-class photographer?
I had a top-class photographer on hand, luckily enough. And eat that, and
serve
it's
with
delighted.
rice.
And serve with rice. And my husband is very sceptical about serving rice that has been cooked in the microwave. But the microwave is a great place to cook rice, by the way. Just put plenty of water in because it'll soak up all that water. Anyway, it's very nice.
Ann said she's just read in the New York Times the movies that should win an Oscar.
Yes.
And Oscars for various categories. And we're going to do a quiz. And actually, you do it at home. Have you ever heard of any of these movies? Okay, what's the first category?
Okay, Ann? So I'm just going to run through names of ones. Yeah, so there's I don't know what that category is. Okay, our critics' best picture picks. So for the best picture picks for the Oscars, there is a movie called The Boy and the Heron. Have you heard of that film?
Only because it won something in the Golden Globe last night. But
I think this is kind of ruined. You see,
yes.
This kind of slightly ruined because we watched that last night. Fallen Leaves.
Never heard of it.
Right. So apparently, according to the New York Times, one of the best films of last year is a film that, and we read everything, by the way. What about The Taste of Things?
Never heard of it.
And what about A Still Small Voice?
Never heard of it. This is unbelievable. Right? And I just saw The Zone of Interest. I've never heard of that before.
Okay, I thought you might have heard of that one. All right. The next one, Best Picture Picks from a different critic. A different critic.
Margot, this is their number one movie critic.
Okay.
Right?
Stop looking now. Right. Menus Plaisir.
Never heard of it.
Occupied City.
Never heard of it.
Showing Up.
Never heard of it.
1001.
Never heard of it.
Stonewalling.
Never heard of it.
Orlando, My Political Biography.
Never heard of it.
Right.
This is unbelievable.
So this is the New York Times. It kind of, actually, funny enough, they did a thing last night at the Golden Globes that I thought was interesting. They gave a prize for the biggest box office success. And I think it was acknowledging the fact that the Oscars and these awards ceremonies very often are supporting movies that people don't want to watch. Only people who work at the New York Times want to watch.
Give me another one.
Okay. Here's another Best Director for... Okay, all of those I think you've heard of. No, Fallen Leaves you haven't heard of.
Never heard of Fallen Leaves.
Anatomy of a Fall.
Never. I don't think. I don't think unless I'd watched Golden Globes last night, I wouldn't have heard Anatomy of a Fall. Go ahead.
Okay, another category. Asteroid City.
Never heard of it.
Okay, and then some of them are being repeated from other places. Have you heard of a movie and the best actor pick? Somebody called Coleman Domingo. I don't mind the name, but in a movie called Rustin.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Interesting. And I haven't heard of these either. This is why when I saw this in the New York Times, I thought, I have to ask Phelim. What about Phelim? Have you heard of the film with Koji Kashikosho, Perfect Days?
No.
Have you heard of a film called Passages?
Never heard of it.
The Holdovers?
Yes, that's the one with Paul
Giamatti. Okay,
yeah,
and you heard about that last night.
No, I knew about that before.
You actually, look at you knowing things. What about a film called A Fire?
Never heard of it.
What about a film called Pacification?
Never heard of it.
Okay.
And these are what the New York Times thinks should win
massive prizes and be celebrated as best movies ever. What about a movie called Priscilla?
Well, that's Elvis. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Oh, yeah, you've heard that one. What about Shada?
How do you spell it?
Shayda.
Oh, Shada.
Never heard of it. What about Earth Mama?
Oh, Earth Mama. I love that. Never heard of it.
Yeah. And then another couple of ones that you might have heard. Again, 1001. I know you haven't heard of that. And then...
But 1002.
Our critics agree on one Best Supporting Actor pick. All right, that's something from May to December. So we've heard of May to December.
We tried to watch it.
And we tried to watch it. But that doesn't mean it's not good. We weren't in the mood to watch it. What about a movie called Monster?
Oh, monster! Never heard of it.
What about a movie called The Eight Mountains?
I have never heard of it.
Isn't that hilarious?
But I've heard of Seven Mountains.
Have you
Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
What about a movie that the New York Times thinks the best supporting actress should be Patti LuPone for Beau is Afraid? Have you heard of that?
Never heard of it. I think I've heard of Patti LuPone.
And and then what else have we got here? Have you heard of and they think best supporting actress should be for somebody called Judith State in RMN.
Never heard of the actor or the.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got to prove the point here.
Kind of prove the point there. Need to not keep going on. We will hear and see you next week from Washington, D.C. with the first day of the Mark Steyn trial. Please don't forget to tune in. Don't forget to support us. We need you and we are very grateful to you. See you then.
Bye.